We're going to take a look at Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 21, continuing with our thought about the works of the flesh versus the works of the Spirit. And Paul here writes about the works of the flesh. Let me read to you these words. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Recently, I purchased a boat for a very good price. There were a couple things wrong with the boat, which was the reason for the deal. One of the things I decided to repair was the motor's tachometer. So I began the work of diagnosing the problem. As I got into the problem, the first thing that I checked was the wiring and discovered that the current tach was wired incorrectly. That was just was problem number one, but not the only flaw. After sorting through the wiring, I discovered that the tachometer was bad. So I purchased a new one, installed it, and initially the results were good, but after running for just about 15 minutes, the tach quit working. Well, I discovered a loose connection, but tightened it. It did not fix the problem. It would run for a short period of time and then quit. Finally, I discovered that the regulator module was defective. Well, after replacing it, everything worked fine. The point of this story is that when there are problems with anything, there can be multiple points that need to be investigated in order to correct the issue. After writing to the Galatians about the need to be led by the Spirit so that believers would not be led by the flesh, Paul presents some examples of sins that the leadership of the flesh might produce. He indicated that these works of the flesh are evident. They are clearly understood by the one doing them, and many may have been seen by others as well. Now, the list that Paul wrote is not an exhaustive listing either. After that listing, he wrote, and things like these. The list contains several examples which can be categorized. The first category dealt with sexual sin when he wrote about sexual immorality, impurity, and sensuality. We do live in a sex-driven world. This is not a new phenomenon, as sexual immorality has plagued humanity throughout history. What characterizes sexual immorality, though? In general, it is anything outside of God's plan for sexual relations in the boundaries of biblical marriage. Sexual immorality can range from entertaining lustful thoughts, indulging in pornographic materials, to sex outside of marriage and adultery. The second category is that of religious sins. This can include idolatry, the occult, witchcraft, etc. Something seemingly innocent, even like using horoscopes or consulting a medium, holding to superstitions and such, would be included, not to mention the practices of the occult. Idolatry, or the worship of false gods, is another area in which people become entangled without even knowing it sometimes. If we are not careful, anything can steal our devotion to God and become an idol to us, even something as innocent as hobbies or sports and like that. The third category are sins that involve our hearts, interaction with others. Paul listed them as enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, and envy. These are sins that well up in the heart of a man and ultimately will spill out in bad behaviors. The list is self-explanatory and are not limited to external behaviors, but also the things hidden in the attitudes of a man's heart. And the fourth and last category are those things associated with substance abuse and unrestrained social behavior, the type generally associated with exercise of alcoholic consumption. Paul mentioned the sins of drunkenness and of orgies here. Again, this was a short list to illustrate those sins that could result from the flesh. Paul then wrote a very ominous warning. He wrote, I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Here there are two big thoughts to consider. First, that sin is a serious problem. So one must examine their actions, diagnose their actions, so to speak. Sin includes attitudes and conduct unbecoming of a believer. But second, sin has dire consequences. We need to understand this verse correctly. When Paul wrote, "Those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God," what did he mean? The phrase "who do" is a translation of the present tense participle form of the Greek verb meaning to practice, i.e., to perform repeatedly or habitually. Those whose lives are characterized by fleshly things rather than Christ's life need to urgently examine themselves regarding their eternal position. So, diagnose your life. Look at the examples of fleshly living that Paul gave. Consider the categories of fleshly sins. While all believers do on occasion sin, sin does not characterize their lives. The believer's life is characterized by Jesus and his or her pursuit of righteousness. Unbelievers, though, have no such pursuit, and thus the flesh controls their lives. And if their lives are characterized by fleshly appetites and control rather than the righteousness of Jesus, they really need to seek that eternal blessing that Christ offers to them by his death on the cross. In the next devotion, we will look at the blessed contrast brought into the believer by the power of God's indwelling Spirit.